It's a beautiful and powerful story, one of the most touching in the Gospels. What's great about this story is it's really a picture of God's grace, His amazing grace. And sometimes we have a hard time wrapping our minds around the idea that God loves us as much as He loves us. I want to set the scene for you in today's passage. This is one of Jesus' parables. Jesus had been going around the country, all around the countryside, healing the sick, restoring sight to the blind, and eating with undesirable people. His actions were upsetting the status quo, the religious people who really ran the show over there. And Jesus was invited to Simon's house. Now, Simon was a Pharisee. He devoted his whole life to studying the Torah, the law of how to live life and to be obedient to God's law. And you kind of wonder, was he trying to determine if Jesus was a true prophet? He probably wanted to question him. Maybe even he wanted to trap Jesus. In that day, it was common for the religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, to gather together and to debate the finer points of the law. It's likely that they were gathering in Simon's home. These were the educated, the learned, the decent people of the village. What we do know is this, that Jesus was not, I repeat, not treated with very much dignity or respect that was often afforded to the rabbis in that day, or even to ordinary guests. This treatment gives us a hint that Simon the Pharisee's intention for inviting Jesus may have been a bit cynical. He did not extend to Jesus the normal courtesies prevalent in the Middle East at that time. Now, when you entered into someone's home, water was supposed to be given, and and your feet were to be washed. There was often a kiss of greeting, and then there was oil that was put on the head, and that was to refresh you. Simon did none of these things. He kind of broke protocol when Jesus entered. He didn't show him any hospitality at all. But as the dinner begins, something very surprising occurs. A woman, most likely a prostitute, walks over to Jesus. Now, in a small town, most people knew who she was and how she earned her living. She was a type of person that Simon the Pharisee and other religious people would have no part of. In that culture, to be associated with her would make a religious person unclean. Then this woman does something totally scandalous. It's if she's oblivious to everyone else in the room. The woman begins to wash Jesus' feet with her tears. I like Eugene Peterson's translation, The Message. It says, she rained tears on his feet. Boy, isn't that descriptive? She rained tears on his feet. She loses all sense of propriety and does everything Simon refused to do for Jesus. She let her hair down. Now, keep in mind, in that culture, you weren't supposed to let your hair down. That was reserved for married couples in the bedroom. That's when a woman let her hair down. And then she kisses his feet. That also was not allowed. And then she takes this expensive perfume from this alabaster jar, which was around her neck, and she anoints Jesus' feet. What a generous act. It's an expression of deep gratitude, love, and devotion. It's an over-the-top outpouring of appreciation and love for Jesus. Can you imagine what it was like being there at the dinner? If you were witnessing this outpouring of gratitude and love. I mean, folks, this is over the top. You know, we read these words and go, oh, big deal, let's put a little bit of perfume. No, this was a big deal. This was thousands of dollars in that economy worth of perfume. How would people react? How would you and I react? Simon's reaction seems kind of callous. He says, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is who is touching him. You know, he's putting Jesus down for reaching out to this woman and her reaching out to him. See, To touch a woman in that society made you unclean. It was guilt by association. A true prophet or religious leader would never put up with such a scandalous behavior. So Jesus senses what's going on in Simon's heart. Listen to his words. Simon, I have something to tell you. Then Jesus tells him this short but powerful parable. See if you can relate to it. A certain creditor had two debtors, one who owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debts for both. Now, which one of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one who owed him more, the one with the greater debt. That's right, Jesus said. Then turning to the woman, but speaking to Simon, he said, Simon, do you see this woman? Luke 7:44. Do you see this woman? What an interesting question. Sometimes we don't see people, do we? Sometimes we just don't see them. We look at people as objects rather than as persons. We don't see people with their real needs and hurts. You know, I talked to a guy when I was up in Montana, really a bright guy. He graduated from Harvard. He was appointed by the Bush administration to work in Tanzania. He worked there 10 years. And I found out that his mother died when he was 5 years of age, but they weren't sure how she passed away, whether it was suicide or a heart attack or what. They weren't sure. And he said that we spent quite a bit of time with him. He came to our family dinners and things. And he said, you know, this is a really healing time for me, because he was raised by his grandparents. And I thought, you know, sometimes we don't see people. We see the oh yeah, PhD, Harvard, appointed by the State Department. They helped 11 million children that would have had AIDS, but he was able to get funds from Pfizer and the Lilly Foundation and others to get this drug that would stop the transmission of AIDS between the mother and child. 11 million kids not getting AIDS because of that. That's pretty remarkable, don't you think? And yet sometimes we don't see people. I thought as Pastor Ticey was sharing about this little kid who was an orphan, they saw that little child and now he's in an orphanage. You know, do we see people? Do we see the hurt they may be going through, the turmoil they may be having inside? See, these people didn't see this woman. They really didn't see her. They just saw her as a woman of the streets. Jesus said to her, I came to your home, but you didn't give me any water for my feet. But she washed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but she hasn't quit kissing my feet. You gave me nothing for freshening up, but she soothed me with expensive perfume. For this reason, I say to you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven, for she loved much. But the one who is forgiven little loves little. This is the key to becoming a generous person. A person who is forgiven little shows little love. This is a simple but profound truth that if we take it to heart can change our lives and transform our relationships. You see what Jesus is saying here? Our ability to love both God and others is linked to experiencing God's love and generosity in our own hearts. Let me repeat that. Our ability to love both God and others is linked to experiencing God's love and generosity in our hearts. This is reinforced in John 4:19 when he writes, we love because he first loved us. For God loves us, not because we deserve it, but he just loves us because he loves us. And it's expressed most powerfully in the way we are forgiven. We become generous people when we know deep in our own hearts the effect of God's grace in our lives. Our debt that we are completely unable to repay is canceled by God's grace. Isn't that good news? That we've been forgiven, folks, of everything we've ever done. That's pretty amazing. That should be freeing for us. We don't have to kind of just feel like we're never forgiven and live in guilt and wallow and self-pity. No, we've been forgiven that we might forgive others and love others. Grace is something we cannot buy or earn. It's not because of our performance. It's a gift that we graciously receive. When we realize how generous God has been to us, we should in turn be generous to others. Because we are loved by God, we can love others. Isn't that a great thing? Isn't it good to be generous? I was surprised when I saw those choir robes up there today. You know, I remember years ago, we had a fire in our church, and the choir robes were destroyed, and the insurance company bought us new choir robes, but then we didn't have a choir anymore. So we had these almost brand new robes, and Pastor Ticey said, it's about 8-10 years ago, he said, "Do you think I can have those robes?" I said, "Yeah, go bless another church with them." And here, 10 years later, we see that people are so happy to get those robes. Doesn't that make your heart leap inside? You know, that's just something we were going to discard, and we were able to bless people. I was thinking about that well they want us to sink. I'm so thankful we were able to sink that well in the Philippines. The same thing, people having to carry water on their heads. I don't know how they do it with that balance. I guess after doing it twice a day for all those years. But having to walk half a mile, quarter of a mile, a couple times a day, that's a lot. How that would transform that village if maybe we could help them sink another well. You know, it feels good to give and to bless people. And I believe God in turn blesses us. When we've been touched by grace, we want to extend grace to others. Most scholars agree that the woman who had had a previous encounter with Christ, at the end of this passage when Jesus says, "You are forgiven," it more accurately reads in the Greek, "You have been forgiven," indicating that perhaps the woman had been forgiven previously. I don't think this is the first encounter she had with Jesus. The story demonstrates how powerful forgiveness is. God's forgiveness gives this woman a new start and transforms her life. What would cause her to be so generous? I'll tell you what caused her to be so generous. She felt forgiven inside. She was shown generosity by Jesus. And generosity gives new possibilities and offers a person a new start. Years ago, I officiated at Richard Paulos' memorial service. And some of you people who've been here a long time knew Richard and Nancy Paulos. But you didn't know him before Richard started coming to the church here. Until age 50, he was living in Northern California. He had a gas station. He liked to drink. He was a heavy drinker and a heavy smoker and a heavy cursor. All his profanity would come out of his mouth. It just kind of would just come out. And then he went to a Calvary Chapel and became a Christian. For the last 30 years of his life, I never heard him curse at all. He put down the booze. He put down the cigarettes. And God just changed his life. He hadn't been a very good father either. But God healed those relationships with his kids. And over those next 30 years, they just loved him and he loved them, and his kids and his grandkids. They had so many grandchildren. You know, many people shared at his memorial service that Richard had helped people in so many, many ways. Financially, he would write a check and help people. He helped through words of encouragement. He experienced God's grace. He'd go to a McDonald's and buy people a meal that were struggling, or those who were on the street, and say, "Hey, come to McDonald's, I'm going to buy you a Big Mac." That was him, and he had these little sayings he put out, and he helped lead the men's group, and he did so much. And it was 7 weeks before Richard died that he was diagnosed with cancer. And he was in the hospital for much of that time. And I remember visiting him on many occasions, and I was always so impressed with his attitude and his steadfast faith in the Lord. The day he died, Richard said to Janice Bowers with a great big smile, almost like he won the lottery or something. He said, "I'm going home, Jan. Thank Roger for coming and visiting me this morning. Take care of Nancy." Nancy was his wife. "I'll see you on the other side." And he tried to sing a hymn with Janice and Nancy later on in the morning. His last audible words were, "Take me home, Jesus. Take me home." You know, I had the privilege of, I just happened to go to the hospital 5 minutes before he passed away. And I remember we were there, and we were there in the intensive care unit, and the intensive care unit was just filled with his family. He had a huge family, all these kids and grandkids. I remember taking his hand, and we recited Psalm 23 together, and we recited the Lord's Prayer together as he slipped into glory. And our faces were wet. I don't think there was a dry eye in that intensive care unit. And I thank God for the privilege of knowing Richard, and not our hope as Christians that we will see him again on the other side. Richard loved much. Why? Because he was forgiven much. Simon the Pharisee did not know this love. He didn't see a need for God's love, forgiveness, or generosity. Pride, self-sufficiency, and self-righteousness blocked his experience of God's love.